name is Jose, and I am a geodetic engineer. That's a field of a geoscience investigation and research, and also engineering. And I'm glad to meet with you today.
So what kind of education do you need to be a geologist?
Well, let's just start by saying that geology is a primary science, which means there are many disciplines within geology. For instance, we might talk about geophysics. Okay, in these times we might be talking even the geoatmospheric, geoenvironmental issues. But so your question is a very general one, but I could say that geology, in general terms, is to be prepared to understand, to approach the different complex and sometimes fascinating processes that gives the shape of our home, the planet Earth. Okay, generally speaking, that's it. So to become a geologist or somebody, let's say, within the field of the geology, you have to prepare yourself to observe a lot, to make a lot of interpretation, and then somehow application in different fields.
So what particular field are you in?
My area of expertise, well, I like to say that, the word expert always is very sounding, but it's the geophysics, because since 1986, when I received my degree as a geoscience engineer, I was involved with the oil and gas business companies. My home country is Venezuela. At that time, it was a strong country, oil business oriented. And then I became a geophysics because within the geophysics, we got different geology knowledge and, let's say, concepts that allow us to understand the very fundamental key for the oil and gas business, which is find out where the oil is, which in very simple terms means where the money is. So my job was to investigate how that oil got there, where it came from, and what kind of oil is it. Is it a high quality oil? Is a mid quality, which means mid value oil, or is a low value oil? So that implies you need to work a lot with physics, some of mathematics. If you want to look at the very composition of the oil and the gas within geology, you will need also to work on the chemistry. So to be honest with you, I was always strong with physics and mathematics, but I was lousy on chemistry. So if you ask me today, I could tell you the ABC of chemistry, but nothing else. But on physics, yes. So for somebody like me within the field of geology, I have to support multidisciplinary teams in different companies in the quest for the hydrocarbon traps. We call them traps. And in order to define what a trap is, we need to look, for instance, have you ever traveled to the mountains? Well, if you have been lucky on that, sometimes when you go to the mountains while mom and dad are driving or somebody else, you might look, and if you're lucky, you might see something that we call faults, which is basically interruption, a lack of continuity in the rock strata. So imagine looking at those kind of elements, faults, closures, which means where the rock suddenly, abruptly terminates, but in the subsurface. So you need to look at the subsurface data that you collect from well that has been drilled for the purpose of production of the oil and gas, and then you apply the geology concepts to tell the other people, you know what, I know this rock here is a hard rock, is a soft rock, or maybe this is a porous rock. And then talk to the chemistry people, say, could we investigate what kind of hydrocarbon could be trapped in these very teeny tiny small spaces? And then at some point, at the end of my job, I need to tell to the owner of the company, who is very struggling with the business purpose of his investment, where to drill a well and make a forecast how profitable that well could be. So, from my point of view, one of the fascinating areas of expertise within geology is to be able to mitigate uncertainties on the subsurface and then provide certainty for people who is trying to make a profit out of it. And in this last, I would say, 10, 15 years, we are now very concerned in doing that in a sustainable way. So now geology moved from the strictly business-oriented point of view to the sustainable point of view. So besides our previous boring mathematics study, physics study, and suffering with chemistry, now we have also to investigate the impact of our job in the environment. Because maybe we did know before, or we had an idea, but we underestimate the impact of our job in the environment. Now, because of conscious, we have to say, you know what? We need to talk to the environmentalists, because these smart people is telling us something. So don't be surprised if you Google or you use any searcher in the website, and you'll find geologists talking to people on the oceans, oceanographies, or environmentalists. And one more thing, if you have ever seen one of these X-ray or echo images of the females when they go to the doctor because they are pregnant, it's a kind of 2D image with some black, gray, and white color. And based on that, you can define the shape of the baby, the condition, the position of the baby. Let me tell you this, something similar to that is one of the very different techniques that we apply in the subsurface to look at the shape, the size, and the condition of the baby, which means where the hydrocarbon is.
On that note, other than mathematics, physics, and chemistry, is there any other classes or extracurriculars that you think would help if you're interested in becoming a geologist?
Yes, it will help you very much, especially at this time with artificial intelligence, something that we call modeling. What does it mean? It means that after you spend a while observing the geology shapes on the surface, that you can go with your car or maybe a truck or a helicopter, depending where it is, then you can go to a small office, maybe like a space where I'm now, and then based on your experience observing what's going on the field, what the reality is in the field, you might create intelligent model of the images in the subsurface, and then combining your observation, because remember, science is observing, interpreting, and then applying. Based on your experience as an observer, you can get into a computer, and then looking at the subsurface images, you can create a model to tell the other disciplines, the other guys, the other smart guys in your team, or if you are working as a standalone person, just to have a stronger idea, a robust idea, what might be the case that you have in the subsurface. So you create theoretical model to infer the reality of the subsurface. And today, combining the artificial intelligence with statistics, which is another field of expertise that you will need to get involved with, you can run a kind of hierarchy, and you say, you know what? By looking at this subsurface data, I might have 25 different possibilities. But from the statistics point of view, the most likely is this one, and the least likely is this one. So you have a whole hierarchy. So modeling, which implies a lot of observation. In my case, I have been more than 23 countries in the world. And so sometimes my job has been just observing what's in the surface to infer what's happening in the subsurface, and then combine it with modeling, which means using your skills with programming, and then statistics. And the statistics is the bridge between the math and the geometry of the subsurface, which is your main job as a geology. That's a good question. Thank you.
What exactly is hydrocarbon?
Well, I should have started. I'm sorry. Hydrocarbon is the term that we use for the decomposition of organic material that in ancient time, in eras before us, they originate the oil. So hydrocarbon is any element combined by hydrogen, and carbon, which at some condition of temperature, pressure, it will originate something that we call kerosene with K. And that's the very, very father of the oil.
Other than oil extraction, what other applications are there of geology in the real world?
Well, that's a very good question. In this time, as I mentioned before, the environment protection has become a very, very important element. There's an argument, there's a kind of discussion. I don't really understand why, but between some people who is not science oriented, some of them are arguing if the climate change is a reality or not. I'm not going into that, but I'll tell you that from my experience and from my engineering point of view, the climate change is a reality. And all of us as human beings, we need to be careful of that. So as a geoscientist, and if you're going to, it would be very nice if you decide to move onto the geology field of expertise or science. I believe that environmental protection or sustainability, which is the term for talking about the same thing, the environment, is very important, which means you will have to start working about oxygen, hydrogen, the impact of those elements in our life. So you will have to be strong on chemistry again.
Also noticed that you were a university professor. Were there any major differences from when you were being taught and when you were teaching?
Well, I remember when I was studying for making any program for the computers were something huge, like half of a room, and we need to perforate in cards. That was my very first programming. Now we can do that on screen. And also a fundamental change has been, and this is very important for you, the imaging. 3D imaging of subsurface data is one of the most powerful tools in the 21st century in the seek and find of hydrocarbons. When you have the capability of looking at the baby, and you can, in a model, rotate it and see in different positions, that's very powerful. And when you could do that with the subsurface, it's also very powerful too. That's one of the major differences. I remember at that time when we were, for instance, drawing our ideas, at that time, that was the modeling on long paper sections. We use different colors just to make the distinction between one strata, one rock strata, and the next one. Today, with one click, you can do it. Of course, on my favor, I would say, like Arnold Schwarzenegger said in one of his movies, I'm old but not obsolete. So because I knew how that was done on the paper, when I look at this on the new, 3D perspective, I know what it is about. So that's a huge difference, but I'm still enjoying those.
So I noticed that you also have given many presentations at elementary schools. So how hard was it from applying the same knowledge to a more simple level?
Well, I love teaching. And I remember in my hometown, which is a very small town in my home country, Venezuela, but he had the idea, why don't we explain to the child the origin of the oil? So I started scratching my head. How can we teach this to 8, 9 years kid? And then a good friend of mine who is a graphic designer, we start talking and with other people. And at the end, we came with 8 big posters because it was in a remote place. We couldn't bring screens or projectors or something like that, even with no power, electricity sometimes. So we brought these 8 big posters, And we start with the organic material coming from plants, coming from animals who died and they were buried in the deep subsurface. Then we move how the temperature, like a boiling kitchen, and then we move how the first bubbles of the that material becomes a kerosene, and then how the kerosene become a huge swimming pool, and finally a lagoon or a sea of hydrocarbons, and how then we drill, and finally we made the transportation of this oil. And the kids were so fascinated. We became the heroes for those kids. And because we like it, we improved the presentation. And to this day, I would say that it's one of the best things probably that I have been able to share in my career, talking to the kids. And I'm still doing that.
How much time do you spend on the field compared to the office?
Well, at this time, I hardly go to the field, but during the first 20 years of my career, I would say 30% field, 70% office, uh, in average, because at the beginning was exactly the opposite. It was most on the field and just going to the office for compiling the data, organize data, and start the interpretation stage. But because the technology has been improved, then we start going less to the field, because we left devices that automatically they collect the data for us. And sometimes with our remote devices, GPS devices, they send smartly the data to us in the office. So, which also means that when you start your career as a geoscientist, and especially if you are in the oil and gas business or even environment business, you might be a very skinny person. But if you don't take care of yourself, in a few years, you'll be fat. So you have to be careful with that, because now the technology is helping quite a lot. You don't need to go the whole time to the field. Drone technology is also very, very useful for inspection of the surface facilities, and also those devices that I'm talking about, where the data comes from the subsurface and is remotely sent to the office. But I'll tell you, in honor of the truth, last time I had a long time on the field was in Egypt, and it was 8 years ago. And after that, I've been in Corsicana here in Texas, and also forward in small local fields, and it's always fun. I'm not bored going to the field.
How do you think technology in geology will evolve over time?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. At this time, I have talked to people. Last year, I was attend a conference about imaging and what the new frontier might be. It seems to be the next frontier is that just by collecting the data, in this case, the seismic data, which is a kind of echo of the subsurface, you can upload this data within the new interpretation system. They call it workstations. And then using the artificial intelligence, the system will provide you with interpretation. And then you just need to say, okay, based on my experience, I believe of the different options you're giving me, again, modeling, a statistic observation, I pick one. We call it an scenario. You got different scenarios, interpretation scenarios. You, as the expert, you pick yours, and then the system will tell you, all right, this is what you have here. You got your soft rock here, your hard rock here, your rock terminations here, and your oil is here. So basically, we'll tell you, drill here. That's fascinating. And that's happening now.
Keep up with these changes.
You have to read a lot. And you have to try always, every other year, you go to these conferences, technology-oriented conferences, and then you catch up what's going on. Remember, when we talk about technology, we might be talking about two different things. One might be devices, objects that you bring on field or to the office to make the job. But the other is mindset, workflows, combining old concepts, but with new technology to improve your interpretation. So every other year, you have to be very wise to select one or two conferences because, of course, as you might think about, it's not cheap attending these conferences. And then you select those that you know are going to keep you catch up. And also you read the articles, the papers that your colleagues in other areas. At my age, um, I have met people worldwide. So I always pending what they publish, what are they doing. That's very helpful.
Other roles do you work with, like your team members?
If you are not technically oriented, but for instance, if you start developing management positions, you might become a team leader. But listen, in my home country, my culture, some people confuse being a manager with being a boss. When you're technically oriented in your job, when you're a manager, you're a team leader, you're a technical leader. So as a geologist, it's quite possible, and in fact, it's very likely that a geology is the head of a team of oil exploration and production team. You might have there petroleum engineers, uh, chemistry engineer, physics, uh, environmentalists, and then you are the head. But as the head, you are supposed to be responsible for everybody, which means you have to be in capability of talking using the acronym, the concepts, and the approach of a multidisciplinary team. So good news, as a geology, you might be a team player, you might be a technical leader, but also you might be even a manager up to a director, depending on which field you are. You are in the public sector or you are in the private sector. That's a good question. Thank you.
So we saw that you were a substitute teacher. How is that?
Mhm.
Are you enjoying that?
Well, even though it's a job, to me, it's really it's a kind of release. I feel so relaxed sharing class to kids at school because I love teaching, and I know that I'm giving to them what some other people gave to me in the past. And I was lucky for having good teachers. So I'm trying to be a good teacher. So yes, it is a job. Yes, they pay me for it, but I do it so happily. And it's so easy to me to deal with these kids.
Do any of the skills transfer over?
Mhm.
Like from substitute teaching to geology and like being a professor? Like maybe something you learned in one field that helps with the other.
Yes, to be humble. One of the big mistakes that as human being and geologists, guess what, are human beings, is arrogance. When we believe we know something that other people ignore, easily we might become arrogant. And one of the biggest mistakes of the oil and gas business and many companies I have worked for was committed because of arrogance. We know everything, we know what we're doing, and then we have a big chip of oil sunk, or we got an explosion in one platform and people die. And then uh, talking to kids, looking at them and looking how much they trust you, to me has been touching to remember, even though we know many things, regardless how much we believe we know, we must stay humble because what we know is much more. Thanks for asking that.
What are some rewarding moments that you've had over the years?
When I finish a report and I can present a positive result to the people I work for, and then sometimes positive result means don't drill that well, all right? Or don't go there. And even though it's a negative answer, but it's a good because then people is saving time, is saving money, or is saving natural life in one place. But also when I say, you know what, we found that you might drill here, or we found successful drilling, because sometimes my responsibility moves to follow up the operation while drilling. And that's really tense time because you made a study, you made the whole preparation work, and then the client or the company say, You know what? I want you to follow up the operation that is going to materialize your conclusions. And is very, very encouraging when you say, I was partially right. Let me tell you something. So far, I have never been 100% correct. But when I have been 80% correct, I'm so, so happy.
So could you walk us through routines you had to do when you were working on a project every day and what you did from morning to night?
Sure. First thing I do is ask for the location of the area of study. Then I ask the data they have, the amount of data, and the quality of the data. It is interesting that sometimes they say, I know what we have. I'm sorry, they say, we know what we have. We don't know how good it is. So my first part of the job is to check the data and tell them the data you have is good quality, fair quality, low quality. And after that, I start compiling the information because you have different sources of information. You got information from the guy who was on the rig, on the drilling site. You got information from the guy who was on the surface, just making the echoes of the subsurface. You got information even from the guy who was in the laboratory looking at the rock and telling you some very specific properties of the rock. So you start combining those set of data in a common database. Once you have your common database, your interpretation work start. So you start looking at all together, and at some point you calibrate all your observations with the only one element. You have to calibrate your data, the well data, because everything else is like an echo. You never went into the subsurface. You record that data from the surface. But wells, they were drilled. So then while making the interpretation, you made the calibration. And once your calibration is done, then you start doing your maps. When you watch news and you listen to these people say, tomorrow we got 40% chance of raining. What they're doing is that they combat data coming from satellites, from radars. They make maps, and based on that maps, then they say our prognosis is 40%. That's what we do, but in the subsurface. And that's the process. The process. Looking the location, checking the amount and the quality of data, combining the data in a database, in a common database, and start interpretation, and finally calibration. That's what you do.
About how long are you working on a project?
It depends. There's something we call a full development plan, which means take one area. It would be a ranch in Texas, or it could be a lawn area in, I don't know, Pakistan or China. And then if we start from zero, it means nothing has been interpreted there. It might take up to 2 years. And a very short project is unlikely less than 2 months.
So we finished all our questions that we had for you.
Okay.
And, just thank you so much. This was definitely an interview to remember, especially when you talked about like how you read like inside, sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit, but how you read inside the earth. And, it was just so interesting and so different from what we usually see. So thank you for your insights. And this was definitely a career to consider.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really good for me to share with you, and I hope some of the things that I share with you might be helpful. And if any of you fall in love with these geosciences, it will be great. Even if you don't, just sharing this for me was a good privilege. And thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, hope you learned something new from this video.
Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share with all your friends.